Magna Carta 2 picks up right after the events of the PS2 original and once again introduces players to the land of Lansine, a land driven by civil war between the North and the South. You take on the fight as Juto, who decides to fight against the threat posed by the North on the princess's orders and get to travel throughout the kingdom with each of your actions and interactions throughout the world, helping to flesh out the surprisingly deep story. For sure, it does suffer from a few cliché elements that seem to plague most RPGs, but it never dwells on them for too long, and instead manages to carve out a unique tale that eclipses that of the original game and several other RPGs on the system. Now let's talk about the big one, gameplay. As you can see, combat is carried out in real time and all revolves around a stamina bar. Each attack or special move you carry out comes with its own associated cost of stamina, and if all of it is used up, then you either chain to another character for a special combo, or just wait until it refills. There are some nuances to this system as well though, mainly in the form of the overheat mechanic that occurs once you run out of stamina and quickly switch to another party member, which causes a chain break. This instantly refills all of your stamina and at the same time increases the amount of damage you can carry out. This loop serves to constantly keep the combat fast and visceral, and when coupled with various elements such as button tapping or timed button presses to pull off specific moves, it saves it from simply becoming a button mashing mess, but rather something that requires your full attention in order to proficiently make your way through each fight. Ultimately, if you're a fan of the original or just RPGs in general, Magna Carta 2 is definitely worth adding to your collection. Velvet Assassin is essentially a stealth game that puts you into the shoes of Violet Summer, a British spy who is tasked with disrupting the war effort throughout Europe and is loosely based on a real-life figure. Much like the name suggests, you'll spend most of your time sticking to the shadows throughout the pretty extensive single-player campaign that takes place over 12 missions. Each of these excursions offer up different locales, from sunburnt forests to dark and claustrophobic sewers, which are all ripe with traps and enemies to block your progress. Thankfully, Violet has a few tricks up her sleeve in order to get the job done, from breaking fuse boxes to turn off the lights to being able to whistle to draw the enemy's attention, and of course a wide range of weaponry to counter their assaults. Complementing the stealth aspect of the game are various disguises, which of course allow you to masquerade as the enemy and penetrate deeper into their territory without much resistance. Also, a nice touch are the various collectibles that litter each level and actually reward the player with XP that can be spent on 3 separate skills. You've got Stealth, Strength and Morphine. Of course, Strength makes you stronger, whereas Stealth makes you faster whilst moving, and finally Morphine allows you to briefly slow down time and carry out a stealth kill. Now, one of the best features in the game without a shadow of a doubt are the visuals. As you'd expect from a game that puts such stress on shadow and light, the lighting effects are truly impressive. Each environment manages to convey a distinct atmosphere as a result, and because of this, sneaking your way through each of them feels like an immersive and at times terrifying ordeal. All in all, Velvet Assassin is one hell of a stealth game that unfortunately never got the recognition it deserved, so if you see it on the cheap, it's well worth adding to your collection. I didn't know anything about Inversion until a viewer of the channel brought it to my attention, so I decided to give it a go, and whilst on the surface it might just look like another generic over-the-shoulder shooter, there's some pretty interesting ideas that it brings to the table, and while it doesn't quite execute it perfectly, Inversion surprised me and felt fresh amongst the sea of similar experiences on the console. Firstly, what helps it stand out is one of the main mechanics you'll be using throughout the game. Early on, you'll be able to equip a device that lets you make the gravity in a particular area either heavier or lighter, and you can use this in combat. If there's an enemy hiding behind cover, you can hit them with some low gravity to make them float in the air, or if there's an enemy charging straight at you, you can hit them with some heavy gravity to pin them to the floor. But besides from the obvious combat implications, you'll also need to utilize gravity to progress through the levels that you play through by creating your own paths. This will cause you, for example, to travel and fight on the ceiling instead of the floor, or perhaps jump between the floor and the wall to tackle enemies. It all adds up to provide an extra layer of strategy to the gameplay. Now, when it comes to visuals, Inversion really excels, and thanks to the gravity mechanic, it results in some rather impressive vistas throughout your time with the game. Unfortunately, it does suffer from some technical issues, the most notable being pop-in and tearing, which is a bit disappointing. Thankfully though, it's nothing that ruins the game entirely, and rather just ends up feeling like a slight annoyance. So if you're looking for a solid shooter to get into, Inversion would make a welcome addition to anyone's collection. Operation Darkness is an SRPG that puts you into the role of a young British man known as Edward Kyle. The story sees him joining the SAS, and after a near-death experience in his first battle, he's saved by a person who gives a blood donation on the field. This gives Edward special abilities that form the basis for the combat throughout the game. The gameplay is very traditional in every sense of the word, and manages to make both weapons and the abilities you use on the field feel equally useful. Each of the combat encounters play out in a turn-based fashion, with each of your unit's movements taking place on a grid. Levels and stats are present, enemies are varied, and scavenging for limited resources is vital, but there are several key features which make the game very different. The most prominent is the cover system, which allows for in-depth tactical decisions. You can have your characters move in groups, defend each other, or cover an area using it, and you absolutely need to utilize this system if you want to progress in the game, as you're usually vastly outnumbered by enemy troops, with one wrong move having a chance to completely screw your chances for victory. This unforgiving difficulty will likely turn a few players away, but for those with a keen eye for strategy and more importantly up for a challenge, you'll likely revel in the way the game is not afraid to hold no punches. If there's one negative I could throw at the game though, it would have to be the camera, which at times becomes an unwieldy mess. Of course, it's not enough to completely ruin the experience as a whole. Of course, you'll slowly get used to it if you end up enjoying the other aspects that make up the game. For those who hate SRPGs or simply lack patience, this is one game to avoid. On the other hand, if they're your thing, then Operation Darkness is well worth giving a go. Bizarre Creations have always been well known for the countless incredible racing games they've developed. From the likes of Project Gotham Racing to the Dreamcast classic MSR, they've always been masters of their craft, and Blur felt like a real culmination of everything they'd learned along the way. It takes the most popular licensed vehicles of its time and allows you to race against other competitors. However, with the added bonus of collecting various power-ups, much in the vein of Mario Kart, and using them against your opponents to win the race. Now, the career mode is where most of the action takes place. You progress through it by taking part in several events and completing milestones in order to unlock the next tier. Each tournament has a number of events you must complete before earning the right to race the leader and win their cut. Most of them are standard circuit races, but there are some drive-in duels, time trials, and destruction events that task you with destroying other cars. Thanks to this variety, making your way through the career mode soon becomes an absolute blast. And to mix it up even further, there are also minor goals in each event, such as gaining fans being one of the most important, as they are essentially the point system in the game. Players can accumulate fans by shooting up the competition, driving stylishly, or getting a podium finish. Furthermore, each tournament has a number of goals to complete before challenging the boss, such as destroying a certain number of cars or performing a specific feat, like knocking another car off the track into a wall. On the whole, Blur has to be one of the most enjoyable and unique races out there that never really got its chance in the limelight. So if you're looking for something fun and ultimately rewarding to get into, Blur has got you covered. Divinity 2: The Dragon King Saga serves as the definitive version of the game, with all of the content from the previous effort, Eco Draconis, running on an entirely new engine. It managed to revamp the gameplay and more importantly squashed many of the bugs that plagued the original release. And the best way to describe it would be a game that's very similar to the likes of Elder Scrolls, as it sees you creating a character, exploring the world, and standing your ground against the various enemies that occupy it. Quests are many, and you'll often have more than one way to finish them, which lends the experience a real sense of freedom as you make your way through it. Couple this with the various dialogue options that accompany most interactions, and what you get is a journey where you're free to shape your hero as you see fit. May that be a bastion of light or an absolute ass, you're more than free to do so. Now, combat within the series has always been compared to the likes of Diablo, and this game is no different. The player is provided with a skill tree that includes many active and passive abilities to choose from that complement the type of class you've chosen, may that be a mage, archer, or straight up brawler. But what helps it stand out, however, is that all of these skills are available to all classes, allowing you to mix and match the best of each into one and become a sort of jack of all trades. As a result though, the game does become rather unbalanced, especially towards the end of the adventure. It doesn't completely break the experience, however, as there are still some challenging moments, but the common encounters soon become a breeze. Overall, it won't be for everyone, but for RPG fans, especially those that enjoy exploring and well-delivered dialogue, it's certainly something worth playing. Every once in a while, a game comes along which is so bad that it's actually good. Bullet Witch is a prime example, and if there was one word to sum it up, it would have to be junk. But it's that good type of junk that's often reserved for those games that put a stupid grin on your face each and every time you play them. You take up the role as Alicia, who is a witch with a gun rod that has the ability to morph into different types of weapons. It's the near future, and some absolute dickhead has opened the portal to hell, resulting in the demons that reside there now roaming the earth, and it's your job to mop them up. You've got a machine, sniper, and shotgun, which all have their own separate uses out in the field, with the machine gun being used to control crowds, whilst the sniper is best from long distances, and finally the shotty for when the action gets up close and personal. What further mixes up the gameplay, however, is several different types of spells that each have a role to play when tackling the hordes of enemies that come your way. For example, you can cast a spectral wall that will shield you from enemy fire. You can also hurl trucks at enemies or cave in ceilings, as well as perform magical attacks, such as the tornado that destroys a lot of things in front of you, but doesn't work on tanks or other heavy demons. What does work on these guys is the lightning, but it can only strike one thing at a time, so learning the limitations and advantages of your spells is a big part of the game. Bullet Witch is a rather short experience, which is also actually a good thing. It would have been so easy to bog down the game with an unnecessary runtime, but it ends up feeling like the perfect diversion and never outstays its welcome. If you're looking for something fun that's easy to pick up and play, then Bullet Witch would be right up your street. Hydro Thunder Hurricane is a sequel to the beloved original that retains almost everything that made the first game so enjoyable. The game consists of playing races against 15 other racers across 8 different water tracks, which may seem few, although they are varied in their theme and have different shortcuts, in addition to the fact that in each of the laps different events will occur that will vary the layout, so the first round will never be the same as the last. Now, the main aim of each race is to consistently grab various cylinders scattered throughout the track that offer a short boost. If you don't crash, you'll be able to never leave the turbo bar empty. Whilst the boost is activated, you've also got the option of performing a jump. With the amount of obstacles placed throughout the course, it soon becomes an essential part of each race. As you win these races, you'll slowly accumulate points, which can be used to unlock new ships and tracks in any of the 4 modes that make up the game. But unlike other titles, however, events that are replayed will still award you with points, assuming you reach the required time or track placement. This was a polarizing decision, since players can essentially race their favorite track over and over again in order to unlock everything in the game. While it does rob them of the experience of racing every single event, those who are frustrated by the more difficult tracks will find this as a welcome change. Overall, Hydro Thunder Hurricane is a great example of what a top-notch arcade racer ought to be. The challenging level of difficulty, focus on speed, and excellent track design are some of the things it managed to do just as well as its predecessor, but the addition of new modes, better visuals, and intricate mechanics make it the best version to play today. Tenchu Z is one of those games that never managed to hit the ground running. Regardless of its namesake, it's one entry in the series that's notorious for its brutal stealth kills and fun sneaking gameplay, which has largely been forgotten. This time around, it saw you creating a character from scratch and taking on a series of objectives set across various maps in the hopes of bringing down a rival nation's climb to power. The only connection to previous Tenchu games is the inclusion of Lord Goda and series-long protagonist Rikimaru. This aspect no doubt turned many fans off and quite possibly contributed to the game's muted success. When it came to the gameplay though, if you had played any of the Tenchu titles in the past, you can pretty much know what to expect from this entry. You basically sneak around and stealth kill enemies until your objective is complete. Or if your mission involves snatching up some documents or merely killing a corrupt person, you could just run through the level until you've reached the target point. This, however, takes away from the enjoyment of performing your kills and ultimately lowers your grade at the end of the level. The gameplay is slow and requires patience. Using rooftops and peeking around corners are the keys to your survival, and this is where half of the fun lies. Rushing in like Rambo will more than likely lead to your death, so the enemies must instead be stalked and taken out as quietly as possible, and this is a lot harder than it sounds. The sense of challenge Tenchu Z provides is easily one of its biggest assets, and will likely see you perfecting your technique over time in order to get it down just right. With about 20 hours of gameplay, plenty of unlockables and reasons to come back for more, Tenchu Z is definitely well worth considering if you're looking for an engrossing stealth game on the 360. The Front Mission series has always been one that has struggled to find mainstream appeal. With the previous games being made up of turn-based tactical outings, it was easy to see why. But in a complete U-turn, the developers decided to give it to a Western studio and pivot the series into new territory. This was achieved by ditching the strategic roots of old and instead opting for a third-person action approach. While some of the series' defining characteristics such as a complicated political plot and a ton of customization options remained, the fast-paced mech combat made blowing stuff up far more accessible and enjoyable. As the player, you jump into a walking tank known as a Wanzer, which can be customized to your heart's content. Part of the fun is tweaking these machines between missions. May that be better agility or a more devastating selection of weapons, the amount of options can be overwhelming at times, but due to the sheer selection on offer, is something that just never gets old and thankfully promotes subsequent playthroughs in order to see everything the game has to offer. While the change might have been hard to swallow for those who have been exposed to the strategy RPG entries in the series, the combat more than delivered, with you having the ability to fully operate your mech in a 3D space. The control layout is similar to the standard third-person shooter in that the analog sticks are used for movement and camera control, while the shoulder buttons control the weapons. Add to this the ability to hover and dash about the battlefield, and it soon becomes a frantic experience as you lay waste to wave after wave of enemies. If you're fond of Visual Lawn or Armored Core for that matter, then Front Mission Evolved is definitely worth checking out. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos that release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.